Hello, this is going to be a quick tour of the AD text editor. So this is a project I've been working on for about a year or so in my spare time now. It's still very much a work in progress, but it's got to a state where I think it's got some fun functionality to show off. So I kind of wanted to show what I went up to. So let's have a tour. The project is available on GitHub. It's github.com/spinners/AD. And if you go there, you can kind of check out the repo, you can do a cargo install, and there's a makefile with a whole bunch of stuff in there for getting dot files and helper scripts and various bits and pieces in the right place. And then if you get that sorted out, you should be able to follow along with this tour, because this tour is also in the repo. I'll link to where it is in the description below. First thing to kind of cover is what's the inspiration behind this? What's it trying to do? So at its core, AD is trying to combine together three things. It's combining together the kind of functionality and kind of extensibility that you get from Plan 9's Acme, which is a text editor written by Rob Pike back in the 90s for the Plan 9 operating system, which is what Bell Labs did after Unix. If you've never heard of this before, it's really interesting and fun. There is this wonderful screencast from Russ Cox, which is well worth a look. I saw this years ago now and immediately kind of went, cool, how do I install Acme? And went and got it installed, played around with it, wrote a bunch of code for interacting with it, but ultimately kind of bounced off of it because I really, really like my modal editing from Vim. So that's the other thing that AD brings in is VI or Vim or NeoVim or Cocoon. Pick your modal editor of choice, whichever one you've kind of played around with. But it's taking modal editing and putting that inside of Acme's kind of way of working with text. And I really do just mean the modal editing. This isn't bringing everything from Vim. So you don't have macros, you don't have all the different registers, you don't have Vim script or Lua engine or all that kind of stuff. It's modal editing is the thing that's going in there. And then the third part is dmenu, which, if you've not seen before, is a really simple little command line utility that you can use that comes from the Suckless folks, who also make DWM. And it's kind of a way of selecting from new line deleted text and then kind of doing something with it. It's really, really useful for kind of quickly kind of filtering down and searching for stuff. So kind of a bit like a fuzzy finder, but a kind of programmable fuzzy finder you can kind of use in shell scripts. And so I kind of wanted that in here as well, because otherwise I'd just have to make dmenu work with it, so I might as well embed it in. In terms of UI, this is one place where currently AD is really quite different from Acme. Acme is a graphical program. AD is currently terminal only. I'd like to make a graphical interface for it at some point, but I've not got around to it yet. And the default interface is very heavily modeled on VI. So it's modal, like we said before. We're currently in normal mode. I can go into insert mode, for example. There are line numbers down the left. And that's kind of it. It's pretty minimal by design, so that there is very little distraction and you're kind of free to extend this interface in a variety of different ways. And it's those features from Acme that are the things that are really going to kind of let you extend this and have some fun with what's going on. Before we look at that, let's a quick kind of chat about editor modes. It's kind of what you'd expect for the most part from something that's kind of inspired by Vim. So you have kind of normal mode that lets you kind of go by motions to kind of hunt around through things and kind of select and manipulate text. There's an insert mode, which is what it sounds like. You can insert text into the buffer. There's a command mode where you can run built-in commands like the echo command that just puts something down at the bottom of the status bar there. There's a run mode which lets you run external commands, so like I can run ls, which will list the contents of the current directory, as you might imagine from ls. And then there's an edit mode that lets you run little editing expressions that let you do things like delete the contents of the buffer. The thing that's different is that in VI and Vim and NeoVim and all that kind of stuff, the way that normal mode motions work are verb noun, as in delete a word or change inside of delimiters, that kind of thing. Inside of AD, it's flipped around. And the first place I saw this done was in Cocoon. I'm not sure if that's the first place that did it. I think Helix also does it this way as well. I forget how Helix works. So in this case, you are describing the thing you want to work with first. So I can select inside of delimiters, and then I can do something with it. Then I could delete it, I could change it, I could append to it, whatever I want to do. The kind of reasoning behind that is the whole purpose of AD is to select pieces of text and do things with that text. And so having it that way around makes a lot more sense. Like the selection is the important bit. The default key map is located here in normal RS inside of the repo. It's kind of mostly what you would expect from a sort of normal mode type thing in a Vim clone. It's not really a Vim clone, but you know what I mean, like normal mode kind of stuff. I'm not going to go through everything here. There's a whole bunch in here. But if you want to have a look through the key map, this is where it's found. And one thing that you might have noticed is we kind of jumped straight to that file here, just from the file path. This is something which is taken from Acme, which is kind of where the sort of slightly weird features of AD start to come in. So this is called loading. Loading a piece of text is done in one of two ways. So if you want to use the mouse, you can right-click on things. So I can right-click on text, and that will highlight the next occurrence of the word text. I can also use the enter key. So I can then hit enter, and I can jump between every instance of text within the buffer. When we right-clicked on a file path, we jumped to that file. Text is not the name of a file within the current directory or an absolute path to a file. So the default behavior that AD has got is to then search for that as a sort of search term within the buffer. But this loading is actually a kind of contextual operation you can do a whole bunch with. This string here, for example, is another file path, but this time we've got a regular expression after it closed in slashes. And what that will do is open that file, same as before, but search for that regular expression. So now we're on line 460 of the file. We've kind of jumped down to where that regex matched, and that's where we've started, or opened the file to, rather. This is the method on an editor, which inside of AD, which tells you what happens when you load something. As you can see, there's quite a lot here. It's talking about filters, it's talking about this thing called plumbing, it's talking about the outcome of plumbing being a message or running some sort of command, and then there's this load explicit string stuff down here, and that's kind of where our search for the next instance in the buffer is coming from. I won't go through all the details of how this stuff works right now, but the main kind of thing is there's a bunch of different ways that you can control what it means to load text, and that's a really kind of key part in AD and how you interact with it and mess around with it. The kind of most fun part of this, I think, is this idea of plumbing. So, as is going to be a bit of a theme with this presentation, here's something I stole from Plan 9. This is an idea of plumbing rules. So this is a little kind of pattern matching kind of language, or config file really, that lets you specify what happens when you load certain pieces of text. And so what it's doing is kind of testing the text that's been loaded, it's kind of extracting stuff from it, reshaping it a bit, and then passing it off to the editor. Now, in Plan 9, this was used as a kind of system-wide utility that connected together a whole bunch of different programs. I've not done that, it's just inside of AD, so the main thing for AD is kind of telling the editor how it should interact with stuff, or how it should hand off something to another program to go and deal with. So in this case, this is a little rule that says if you can find something that looks a bit like a git commit, then we should run git show for that SHA, and display the output in a new window. So we're going to show that data, and we're going to make a file called git / and then the SHA, and then show what that looks like. So we can do that. If I run git log --1 line, that will run git log --1 line like you would do if you ran it in the terminal, but it dumps the output into AD, which means our loading rules are in place. So if I right click on a commit like this, it will run git show, it will show me my commit details, and it will show me the diff of what was inside of that commit. And that's all being handled by that little 4-line editing rule that says how that works. You can also do fun stuff like this. Like this is the kind of syntax you'll see inside of man pages for kind of cross-referencing man pages. So if I right-click on that, I get the man page for ls. And if I scroll down to the bottom, I can see that there's a man page for something else. I can load that, and that gets me the man page for dir colors as well. And that's just being handled by one of these plumbing rules. There's also, this isn't just text this works with, so I can also have a JPEG, and the plumber knows to hand that off to an image viewer for viewing. This is Glenda, by the way. This is one of the kind of mascots for Plan 9, I believe. It's a space bunny. Everyone needs a space bunny. The other thing you can do is execute text. So this one's a little bit simpler to explain. There's kind of two things here. It's basically command mode and run mode. So if you execute a piece of text, you can either middle click on it or you can use the @ key. The AD will first try to run that as an internal command. So it will prefer internal commands first. If what's in your selection matches something it understands what to do, it will directly execute it itself as part of the editor. If it's not recognized, it will assume that you're trying to run something as you would do from a command line in a shell and run that. So edit is a built-in command that runs those little edit kind of commands like we saw before. So instead of opening edit mode and then typing it in down here, I can have an edit expression somewhere in a buffer and then I can execute it from there. So this one is, if you've used kind of sed before, you can probably see what this is going to do. It's going to substitute mouse for clicky thing, and that runs within the buffer. This one is going to run ls, and so first let's go to our output buffer and delete that so we can actually see the output of this, otherwise it's just going to be on the end of it. If I run ls, we'll get the output of ls. Kind of what you'd expect. If I run date, I'll get the output of date. Again, kind of what you'd expect. But if I run date and my selection includes a less than character at the start, what that's going to do is run date and read the input into this buffer rather than that output buffer where things have been going so far. So I can kind of replace the selection with the output from that command, which is quite useful for kind of quickly running kind of shell one-liners and pulling that data into the buffer you're working on. It's kind of nice. What happened there? There we go. Now that edit expression is using something that's called structural regular expressions. And again, something I've stolen from Plan 9. This comes from a text editor called SAM, which was actually Rob Pike's previous editor to AD and to Acme rather. And Acme uses this kind of structural regular expression language as well. So at its simplest, it's kind of the same kind of thing as sed. You can do substitutions. But it's a lot richer than that. So like I've kind of got in this kind of table here, there's a whole bunch of different things you can do. The key bit is this idea of looping. And so structural regular expressions can match across new lines. And the kind of idea is to kind of break the input text into chunks that match some particular pattern and then kind of drill down and do things with it. So you've got ideas of looping, you've got ideas of filtering. So G and V kind of work like grep and grep-v respectively, in terms of taking your kind of chunks that you've got so far and then keeping the ones that match an expression or keeping the ones that don't match an expression. And then you've got a bunch of things that is a lot like what you can do inside of Vim. So you can insert after a match, insert before a match. You can append after a match. You can change the match for something else, or you can just delete it. And then you can also print. So you can either print with a template or capital P will just be print the thing that matched. But this little kind of language, if you like, gives you a way of doing some really quite fun and complicated things. And like I said, the idea is rather than writing one single expression, you write a little pipeline of this kind of looping and filtering kind of stuff to kind of drill down. And so you end up typing a little bit more, but I think the resulting kind of syntax for what you get is a lot easier to reason about. And like I said, this is coming from SAM, which is another text editor, also from Rob Pike, and well worth a look at. There's a bunch of papers on how this works and how the expression language works and all that kind of stuff. Definitely have a look at that, it's good fun. So as an example of what that looks like, we have a little editing script here. And if you think back to the slide that we just looked at, I'll quickly go through this. I won't make any attempt to explain it in kind of full generality, but we're going to split based on repeated new lines, which means we'll break on blocks, or blank lines rather. We're then going to, for each of those blocks, we're going to select things that match a line that says occupation programmer. This @ here matches truly any character. So a dot in a regular expression matches anything but a new line, and at also matches new line. So this is going to say, if a block has anything in it, any line in it that says occupation programmer, select the whole thing. And then within that block, we're going to look for something that looks like name, colon, and then a name, and then we're going to print that name and say name as a programmer. So if we execute that, we get Alice as a programmer and Bob as a programmer, because it's selected those two blocks, it's seen the occupation as programmer, and then it's extracted out the names. That's pretty cool, I think. I think that's good fun. This is I really like this as an idea, and I'm really surprised that this isn't like a standard command line utility that you can use all over the place. I think SAM itself has like a command line version, but it's not like widely used, and I really don't understand why, because it's really, really useful. Since it's so useful, AD also has like a command line scripted mode that you can run. So if you do AD-E, you can provide one of these editing expressions on the command line, or you can do -F, and that lets you pass a file path that contains a script. So as an example of that, here's a deliberately more complicated kind of and the kitchen sink example that uses pretty much every single feature that is available in the engine. And what this one's actually doing is having a look through Rust import blocks to sort of summarize what's going on. So this is going to have a look at this file here, which is the data structure used for how the keymaps work that we looked at before. And if we execute this, you'll see that what we get is a summary of different input blocks, the methods inside of them, the return type of those methods, and whether those methods mutate self. Kind of pointless as a thing to do, but it's kind of fun, and the fact that you can do that as like a little script that kind of rips through and drills down into this stuff, hopefully that kind of demonstrates a little bit of the power of this stuff. It's really, really useful for kind of drilling through and processing text, even like slightly irregular text or text that's not some kind of simple format like JSON or YAML or something. Not that YAML's simple, YAML's insane. Cool. So switching gears a bit, that's kind of things you can do inside of AD, like what you can use as like, cool, I'm inside of AD, what features have I got? The real fun stuff happens when you want to interact with AD from the outside, and this is the kind of bit with Acme that really blew me away the first time I saw it in that screencast from Russ Cox. So, oh, by the way, if I haven't mentioned this before, when I'm right-clicking on these URLs, that's also using the plumber and sending them to Firefox here so that we can open the URL. That's how I'm opening all these URLs as we go. So this is 9P, which is a file system protocol, and this is Ken Thompson's idea of a virtual file system. So it's super minimal, super composable, really easy to implement. It's quite nice. And you are hearing that correct. This is a file system protocol in a text editor, because what happens here is AD presents itself to you as a file system. And this is how all of Plan 9 worked. But if you have this command line utility 9P, that's a little kind of client that knows how to speak this protocol, and that lets you send messages to a virtual file system and interact with it. So the kind of operations here are kind of what you'd expect from a kind of file system API. You can read, write, you can list, you can stat to get the metadata, that kind of stuff. So if I do 9P ls AD, that kind of lists the root of the AD file system. And if I do AD buffers, you'll see that we've got a whole bunch of buffers open now, because each time we're going to a new slide, that's a new buffer. We'll look at that in a sec. And I can do things like read the ID of the current buffer. So if I do 9P read buffers current, that tells me that buffer 18 is the current buffer. We can kind of confirm that down here. If I open the buffer list, you can see that buffer 18 is indeed the one that's currently AD doctor fsys, which is what we're looking at. We're looking at the file system. And if I read 18, or sorry, not read, I want to list because that's a directory, there's a bunch of control files in here. So the simplest thing we can do with that is we can read some of the files which probably do what you expect. So if I read the file name, I get the file name. If I read the body, I get the body. But then I also have some slightly odd things in here. So if I make a selection, like this. And then I read something called the adder. That gives me the address of my current selection. So this is where we get down to what I was saying of like the whole point of AD is to select parts of the text and then do things with it. This is a kind of way of specifying a region of text within the buffer. So this is Unicode character offsets in terms of the columns, and then it's line numbers. So this is line 11, character 1, down to line 13, character 33. So that's kind of a selection from here down to here within our buffer. And so the adder there, that's the address of that bit. There's also a control file called dot. And what that is the contents of the current address. So I can read out the current selected text within the buffer. If I select a different piece of text, let's just make it a bit messy like that, I get that instead. And for extra fun, I don't just need to read it, I can also write to it. If I can spell. Hello from the shell. And that will get sent into the buffer. So these control files really do let you read and write data from AD. It's an API for working with AD. If you have fuse on your system and you have the fuse mount and 9p fuse binaries, then in your config file, which is available again in the repo, the sort of makefile target for setting up dot files will set this up for you. There's this auto mount property. By default, that's off. This is the default config file. Mine sets it to true at the moment. And at that point, Fuse knows how to mount a 9p file system. So this is all of those control files we're reading with 9p available just in your file tree. So you, at this point, you don't even need a 9p client. You can just use ls and cat and echo and whatever you want. You can just interact with these files. So all the kind of API interaction for kind of manipulating the current buffer, reading stuff out of the buffer, all of that is possible just using normal file operations. And this is the thing about Acme that made me really fall in love with it. All you need is read and write. Like, that's it. If you can read and write files, you can control AD. If you've got Fuse, then that really is it. Like, if you can read and write a file, you can write an extension for AD in any language you want. And that's literally the API that you need. Like, you need to understand the semantics of the files, of course, but after that, like, you don't need any libraries. The standard library of whichever language you want is probably going to handle that for you. If you want to talk directly to it using 9p, then you need a 9p client. I've got a 9p client available in the repo. That is a Rust version that you can use for writing kind of more complicated programs. There is also a kind of libad.sh script, which is just wrappers around this 9p command line utility. So that gives you a bunch of little sort of shell helpers for doing things if you want to do this with shell scripts. And then there's a bin directory that's got a whole bunch of example scripts that you can play around with for doing things. But quite genuinely, read and write is the API for AD, which I think is ridiculously powerful once you start having a play around with it. And as an example of the kind of things you can do, this entire presentation is, hopefully you've kind of noticed by now, is running inside of AD, and it's using this API for working with it. Like this previous slide, next slide buttons up at the top are just text. Like, there's nothing magic about that. It's just a header that I've put into the file. Those are just files that are available on the path that AD can find and run when they get executed with that execute middle click or at. And they're just wrappers around this script here, which looks for an index file, which just lists the files in the presentation. And if you're going forward or backwards, it finds the file you're currently on, works out the next one, and loads that file into AD and sets the header and a couple of other things. but that's it. Like, that gets you a little presentation program in kind of basically no shell script at all. If you want to do something more advanced, there's this Rust check one, which is kind of a thing I've been playing around with and adding more and more to kind of just have a bit of fun with and see what's it up to now. It's just under 100 lines of shell script, but this is doing a bunch of different things. And one important thing that it's doing is if I do, what was that again, like buffers 18, it's looking at this event file. And so this event file is actually what happens when you load or execute anything, or insert and delete in the buffer. Those events get reported over the event file if someone's listening. So if someone's opened that file for reading, the events get sent there. And so all that default load behavior, all the stuff with execute, stops happening. You get control over that. You can choose how that gets interpreted. It's really kind of fun. It means that you can kind of make little text user interfaces really simply. So as a kind of example of what that looks like, if we open that try rs file again, I can run rust check, because that should be on my path, and that will run. And if I have a look in our buffers, we've got quite a lot now because we've been opening a bunch of slides, but if I go to plus cargo, there is now a little buffer in here that is owned by that script. So that script is taking control of this buffer and is intercepting events with this. So I can do things like middle click on watch tests, and I'll get a little prompt for args that I want. So I might want to just run the test just for the try rs file, and that will run the test suite for try rs. I've got my args up there. I can stop running the tests and clear the output. I could run without a filter and run the full test suite for AD as a whole. And the other thing I can do is have a look at what happens when I break something. So for example, if I just put a space in here, this is now invalid syntax. If I save that, it should jump back. There we go. And I get the output from cargo check, or cargo clippy in this case. And as shouldn't really be a surprise at this point, this is a file path with an address at the end of it. If I right click on that, it takes me to where the error is. This is an error number that doesn't have a default loading rule, but because we're intercepting the events, I can define what happens when I right click on that. In this case, I'm going to show the explanation for the error, and I can jump between the different errors I've got, and I can kind of clear that error output if I want to as well. If I want to go fix things, I can come here and save that, and then when I go back to my cargo buffer, it's detected that the buffer was saved, rerun the cargo check, and seen that everything is now fine. And so that's really kind of that's kind of it, really. That's kind of what we can do with this. Like, I say that's what we can do with this. That's an example of what we can do with this. Hopefully that's got you kind of thinking about the fun things you could do with this kind of read-write API and the file system interface, and this idea of loading and executing text. This is kind of AD in a nutshell. It's super minimalist as like a starting point in terms of what comes out of the box, but it's designed around giving you expressive power for text. So it's not just about manipulating and editing text, it's about executing and loading text. And none of these ideas are really original or super new. It's all taken from pre-existing things, but I think the combination of them is quite fun. So if what you've seen looks interesting, if you want to have a play around with it, like I said, everything is available on GitHub. It's sminnes.com/AD, or github.com/sminnes/AD rather. And yeah, I hope you enjoy what you've seen. If you have a play around and you like it, please let me know what you think. And happy hacking on things. And I'll see you in the next one.